Eloise Asylum is one of the scariest places in America. Somewhere between 20 to 40,000 people died in this asylum while it was open. And the tales of abuse that happened here will haunt you. They've also seen the Hat Man here repeatedly. The video of us ghost hunting here is on my YouTube now.
And everybody's gonna be like, have you ever heard the superstition about a welcome mat outside of your door?
No.
You shouldn't have one. Reason is because...
Let me guess. It's gonna fucking invite entities into your...
You're basically inviting anything to come inside your house. Meaning you're inviting demons, evil spirits.
I never heard that before.
Yeah, bro, because you're inviting it in.
Alright, so do you think that rubs off and like it brings evil people try to break in, rob?
Maybe it could just bring all the bad energy, or but again, that's just a superstition, bro, that people believe. Oh, it's bad to have a welcome mat. Some people are just like, it's just a mat, bro. It's not that serious.
You already know the comments gonna be like, bro, I can't have anything no more. I have one right now.
That ass, bro. I know a lot of people out there have a welcome mat, bro. So just be aware if some weird shit starts happening in your house, bro, some ghost activity, maybe it's because of your welcome mat.
Imagine being sent plunging to your death from a roller coaster. It was the 28th of August 1999 in New Jersey. 39-year-old Kimberly Bailey was at Jillian's Wonderland Pier with her 8-year-old daughter Jessica. The mum and daughter were visiting from Pomona in New York. Now the pair had decided to spend their Saturday night spending some time together and enjoying the rides. They were looking forward to going on the Wild Wonder roller coaster, and they had no idea it would be their last. Now they boarded the roller coaster, but little did they know that the ride had malfunctioned. After making its way up to the highest point of the ride, it then slipped and fell 30 feet backwards. As it accelerated down the hill, it smashed straight into another car. Now this carriage was being loaded for the next ride. The mother and daughter were tragically sent flying to their deaths. The 2 people in the second car were also injured. It turned out to be a mechanical failure that led to the horrific accident.
This is by far the most brutal way somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture. This is Octavio da Silva, and he was a 20-year-old soccer referee in Brazil. And on June 30th, 2013, he was refereeing a soccer game when he sent off a player named Josmir Santos Abreu, who was 31 years old. He refused to leave the field and began to fight with the referee Octavio. Josmir threw a punch which made Octavio draw a knife from his pocket and repeatedly stab Josmir. Josmir died on his way to the hospital, and when fans watching the game, including Josmir's family and friends, found out about his death, something absolutely disturbing happened. They all invaded the field and stoned Octavio before decapitating him and then ripping his limbs off his body with just their strength and no weapons. And they then put his head on a stick in the middle of the field like a flag. And what makes this even worse is that a graphic video surfaced online shortly after the incident, showing medical personnel reassembling Octavio's body. The video and pictures are extremely and utterly disturbing. I seriously don't recommend looking them up. The way that his limbs looked after being ripped off is extremely unsettling to look at, because you see strings of flesh, tissue, and bone because nothing was cut off properly since everything was brutally ripped off. This case is just absolutely awful, and why in the world did Octavio pull out a knife when somebody just punched him? If he didn't stab Josmir to death, he would still be alive today and not torn apart in this brutal fashion. Just imagine literally being ripped limb from limb by an angry group of soccer fans, and there's nothing you can do as they pull your body apart.
The age of consent in America is 18 years old. Age of consent means the age you are legally allowed to engage in sexual activities.
This is TikTok famous creator Teacher Luke, and he's a hardcore pedophile. So before his arrest, Teacher Luke actually had 1 million followers here on TikTok. People came to him looking for advice on language, and they trusted him. He had a very likable personality. From the outside looking in, his life seemed perfect. That was until he was arrested last month in Thailand. So at the time of his arrest, Luke was actually in Thailand teaching young children how to speak English. This seemed to be going well for him until one of the children's mothers caught him doing something to her daughter. So at first the mother became concerned when she saw messages that were getting explicit between her young daughter and Luke. But eventually, after she reported him to authorities, this story took a gruesome and disturbing twist. Not only had Luke been engaging in inappropriate behavior with this child for months on end, he had actually been recording all of these encounters for his own sick personal satisfaction. And eventually, this whole story ended up unraveling because the mother's daughter came down with chlamydia and gonorrhea, which she had contracted from none other than Luke. I think that this whole story just makes that first initial clip so much more disturbing when you consider context. And this case obviously has yet to be resolved since it happened so recently, but he faces up to 10 years in prison and a fine of a couple $100s. And I'm really hoping that this sick freak gets put away for a while so he can't target other children.
This is Rachel Morin. She was murdered 6 months ago while running alone on a popular hiking trail. Her murder is still unsolved, but police just released these new sketches of her killer. Everyone needs to know her story because this person could very well strike again. On August 5th of last year, Rachel left her home to go on a run at the Ma and Pa Heritage Trail in Bel Air, Maryland. It was a trail that she was known to hike, but that night she never returned home. Her boyfriend ended up reporting her missing at around 11:20 that night after not being able to contact her, and within hours, her car was found parked at the trailhead. The next day, someone searching for Rachel called 911 to report a body that was found near the Ma and Pa Trail, and when authorities arrived, they confirmed that it was Rachel. Not a lot of detail has been released about her cause of death, but police did say that it was clear that she'd been a victim of a violent homicide, and they suspected that she was attacked on the trail and then pulled through a wooded area before being killed in a drainage culvert. Authorities combed through hours of video footage from in and around the trail in hopes of quickly finding her killer, but they came up empty-handed. Then the focus turned to her boyfriend, who does have a criminal history, and he was kind of thrusted into the spotlight. But what the public didn't know was that authorities were able to pull DNA from the crime scene, where they were then able to run it through a national database. And not only did it not match Rachel's boyfriend, it actually matched and was linked back to a man who assaulted a young girl in Los Angeles during a home invasion on March 26th. Although the link did not provide the killer's name, investigators were able to review the home invasion and found that the man responsible for both crimes was actually caught on the home's security footage. The man entered the LA home possibly through a window and assaulted many members of the family, including a young girl, and he was eventually scared off. He was then seen leaving the home through the front door on security footage. Police believe that had he not been scared off by another family member, that this case would have likely ended similar to Rachel's. DNA left behind on a hat at the California home was confirmed to match DNA that was left behind in Rachel's murder. And with the help of witnesses on the trail that night, as well as the family members of the home invasion, police were able to put together this new sketch of Rachel's killer. He's believed to be around 5'9", between 20 to 30 years old, roughly 160 pounds, and has dark hair. Authorities are concerned that whoever did this could possibly be a serial killer who was escalating and could possibly kill again. At this point, it's not clear if Rachel was targeted, as she did frequent the trail, or if her killer just randomly stumbled across her that night. But one thing police do know is that the killer was likely very familiar with the area, and they believe that he'd been in the area for possibly even weeks leading up to the murder. Sheriff Jeff Gaylor said that his gut tells him that Rachel was stalked, but he also said that they can't rule out the possibility that this was a crime of opportunity. It's now been 6 months, and Rachel's murder is still unsolved. Ma and Pa Heritage Trail is somewhat popular, and it starts behind some businesses that are always pretty busy, including a brewery and a Domino's Pizza. It's also entangled in a neighborhood, so this area is never that desolate. Someone has to know something. Right now, there's a $35,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. If you have any information about the murder of Rachel Morin, please contact the email on the screen.
Urban legend about mermaids, and it involves Mario Moreno, aka Cantinflas. I don't know if you know who that is.
Of course, yeah.
For those of you who don't know who that is a very, very famous Mexican actor. At the very peak of his career, he had everything he ever wanted. He was a top comedian for, the Mexican industry. He had the houses, the money, his family was set. But in this urban legend, it's told that even though he had everything he ever wanted, there was one thing that he was never able to experience.
What?
See a mermaid. So he was at a bar one day by himself, and then some guy by the name of Carlos Lorenzo approaches him and is like, "Do you really want to see a mermaid?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's all I ever wanted." He had this obsession with mermaids, and he wanted to see a real life mermaid. So this guy Carlos tells him, "Okay, what you're gonna do is you're gonna buy a mansion by the edge of the sea, and you're gonna have a statue of you facing out into the ocean, and whenever you go at night and you stand next to that statue and you look down into the water, you're gonna see mermaids." So that's exactly what he did, and he actually made a statue exactly how the legend says, that's facing, waiting for something in the ocean.
Oh, it's a real life statue?
Yeah.
Oh, what the?
It is also said that sometimes at night you can still see some mermaids approaching, waiting for him to be at the edge of the house and shit.
What the?
Like I said, this is just an urban legend.
Nah, yeah,
you know,
of course.
And also, I want to pull up a couple of videos that went viral years ago. And I
Whenever mermaids were popular.
at this time, bro, I feel like mermaids were like at its peak.
I feel like what kind of boosted its popularity was the mockumentary, Mermaids the Body Found.
Welcome to Famous Autopsies Part 2. In this series, I'll be breaking down famous celebrity autopsy reports, so this is a massive trigger warning. Today we are going to be talking about Kurt Cobain, who is the lead singer of Nirvana. Kurt Cobain was outspoken about his struggles with mental health and addiction, often including it into his songs, but he also struggled with health issues. He was affected by chronic bronchitis and debilitating stomach pains. On March 31st, 1994, he fled from a rehab facility after just 3 days and took a cab to a gun shop in Seattle where, according to the receipt, he purchased shotgun shells, and on April 8th, an electrician who was meant to install security lighting found what he believed to be a sleeping Kurt Cobain in a studio attached to his house. But upon closer inspection, he saw blood coming from his ears. Sadly, Kurt Cobain was dead at just 27. His external exam revealed numerous needle puncture marks, with associating bruising and an entrance wound in the front roof of his mouth. It's accompanied by several lacerations, some with tissue hanging. The lacerations are likely a result of gases leaving the barrel with strong force. The internal exam revealed that the path of the bullet was upwards, front to back and slightly left to right. His skull sustained several fractures, meaning broken in multiple places in several regions. His brain was transected by the bullet, meaning severed. The lack of blood on scene is due to the fact that the entrance wound was inside of his mouth and the bullet settled in his head, meaning there was no exit wound. Rest in peace to Kurt Cobain, you will always be missed.
This is how Snapchat helped to solve the murder of a teenager who was shot in Merseyside. On the 7th of April 2020 in Sefton, Merseyside, a distressed call came into the police. It was the younger brother of 20-year-old Mikey Rainsford. He stated, "My brother's just been shot." He then explains that we don't even know if we're safe and can be heard shouting, "Mike, wake up." Mikey's brother Josh and his dad had been watching TV. Mikey returned home that night at about 11 p.m. Mikey then asked his dad for a lift to his girlfriend's house and his dad agreed. His dad watched and waited as Mikey packed a bag of snacks from the kitchen. Suddenly, the pair were startled by two loud bangs. These turned out to be gunshots through the window, and Mikey quickly fell backwards. It became apparent that Mikey had been shot. His dad started chest compressions while Josh rang 999. Soon, armed police entered the house and Mikey was taken to hospital but tragically was pronounced dead shortly after. Within hours, rumours were circulating on social media that Pip and Worm were responsible. These were nicknames of the Foy brothers, Michael and James. They were known to be involved in gangs and substances. Now, 53 minutes prior to Mikey's killing, a police officer was in the local area and noticed two people on a scrambler bike. Suspecting that this meant trouble, the officer called for backup, but she then noticed a house with a broken window. This was the house of the Foy brothers and their mum Joyce. It transpired that somebody had thrown bricks through the window and one brick had narrowly missed Joyce's head. Police started to collect CCTV evidence of the bike that had been spotted in the area, and they found the bike on CCTV around the same area and time of Mikey's killing. Police then got a search warrant for the Foy's property and found nothing. Strangely, James, Michael and mother Joyce all apparently lost their phones the day after the murder. Despite this, police were able to use mobile phone data to pinpoint the brothers' movements on the night. A Snapchat video was uncovered featuring an electric bike similar to the ones that the brothers owned from an account linked to James. This was the Snapchat image with the following text. Minutes later, Mikey was killed. There was no evidence that the bricks through the window had anything to do with Mikey Rainsford. By all accounts, he never got involved in any gangs or trouble or substances. The Foy brothers' mum was charged with perverting the course of justice. She was accused of disposing of her SIM card and was jailed for 2.5 years. Michael Foy was found guilty of murder and got life in prison with a minimum of 30 years. James was found guilty of murder and possession of a firearm and got a minimum of 28 years. Their uncle Craig Johnson and a neighbour were found guilty of perverting the course of justice after getting involved in the aftermath.
This man is one of the worst pedophiles in the history of England. So this is 28-year-old loner Nathan Bake. Nathan was from Cheshire in England, a community known to be relatively safe and happy. Now Nathan worked as a tire mechanic before he was arrested. Coworkers thought that he was a weird kind of loner guy, but he didn't really seem that harmful. But even though he looked normal on the outside, this man was the devil himself. You see, Nathan Bake was the administrator of a website called The Annex. This website was a pedophile's dream. It featured hundreds of thousands of images and videos, and Nathan actually managed 30 staff members that helped run this pedophile website. So to get into the website in the first place, users would have to actually post CP or CSAM videos and images of their own. Then they would be granted access to the library of disturbing content. So Nathan was second in command on the site's hierarchy. And Nathan really loved something called hurtcore, which are images and videos depicting the most severe kinds of abuse of young children and even infant babies. Now, Nathan would regularly post little updates to his fellow pedophiles on the website, and he would frequently post things like, "It's happy hour right now, post photos and videos of the boys and girls that make you the most happy." That's a direct quote from a news article. So there have been a number of different people who have been arrested as being a part of this website, including people like a psychiatrist from London. But when police officers finally searched Nathan's home, I don't think they were prepared for what they were about to find. Inside of the house and on all of Nathan's hard drives, totaled together, they found hundreds of thousands of CP and CSAM photos and videos. Just let that sit for a second with you. Hundreds of thousands of images and videos on this guy's devices. Nathan also had a 576-page handbook on how to be a pedophile and not get caught. And if you thought this guy couldn't get any worse, he does. You see, Nathan was also the co-creator of a second child abuse website. And he was the head moderator of a page for pedophiles, which provided people with links and resources to find all of the CP and CSAM that they could possibly want. So in total, the Annex website had over 9,000 pedophile members registered at the time that it was captured. But most of those people, as we know with cases like this, are going to evade justice. They'll never be caught. And it's incredibly, deeply disturbing that stuff like this continues to happen every single day all across the world. And in cases like this, people don't get punished as severely as I think they should for the level and magnitude of crimes that they commit. You see, at the end of the day, just recently, it was found that Nathan Bake was guilty, but he was only sentenced to 16 years in prison. Hundreds of thousands of images and videos, and he only got 16 years. Now, if that doesn't make you a little bit angry, it definitely should.
Why is nobody talking about what's going on in Alabama and how bodies of prisoners have been returned to their families with their organs missing? 2 families have now come forward claiming that their loved ones who died while incarcerated in Alabama prisons have had missing organs, and it's left many wondering what's truly going on. This was brought to light when 43-year-old Brandon Clay Dotson was found dead in his cell at Ventress Correctional Facility in Barber County on November 16, 2023. His death was already deemed mysterious to his family because it came on the same day that he was supposed to be considered for parole. His family then spent 5 days trying to claim his body, and when it was finally returned to them, Brandon was severely decomposed and he had bruising on the back of his neck, and his head was also extremely swollen. Based on the condition of his body, his family suspected that foul play might be involved, but they never received a death certificate from the Alabama Department of Corrections. So this prompted them to hire pathologists to conduct a second autopsy, and from those findings, they discovered that Brandon's heart was missing from his chest cavity. This was obviously very alarming to them because they were never notified or given a reason as to why his heart was missing. When reaching out to the ADOC to find out where his heart was, they stated that it was possibly given to the University of Alabama at Birmingham for research purposes. But when the family reached out to the university, they said that they never did an autopsy on Brandon and never received any of his organs. This prompted Brandon's family to file a lawsuit against the ADOC, mainly because they wanted to figure out where his heart was. But even today, it remains missing and unaccounted for. But because of this lawsuit, another family came forward and stated that the same thing happened to them. This time it was the family of 74-year-old Charles Edward Singleton, who died on November 2nd, 2021 at the Hamilton Aged and Infirmed. When his body was finally returned to his family, the funeral director told them that it would be really hard to prepare his body for viewing because of how decomposed Charles was with advanced skin slippage. And when asked why he was in such bad shape, the director told them that he was brought in missing all of his internal organs, including his brain. This came as an absolute shock to the family, just like in Brandon's case, because they were never notified or given a reason as to why this occurred. According to the family, the funeral director told them that normally organs are put in a bag and then placed back in the body after an autopsy, but his body had none. Charles's family were reportedly told that the UAB's Department of Pathology performed the autopsy and likely had his organs. But when they reached out to them, they were also told that they didn't have them and had never received them at all. So both men's organs were taken without consent and are still missing to this day. This has shed light on a disturbing pattern that has happened to many families in Alabama. Although just 2 have been identified because of the lawsuit, a funeral director in the area has stated that there were at least 5 other cases where they received bodies in a similar manner and in such horrible conditions. From the stench being so bad that loved ones couldn't have an open casket, to an incident where a prisoner's scalp had been pulled all the way back and not properly put back in place. The lawsuit against the ADOC is alleging that the organs of these deceased prisoners have been removed for improper purposes and to essentially be experimented on, and that the department is illegally taking organs from prisoners without notifying their family. A list of all organs that have been removed from prisoners that have died in the state's correctional facilities since 2013 has been requested to further investigate. But this has left many families who have had loved ones die questioning whether or not they were murdered, and they want to know what's truly going on in Alabama.
I'm gonna show you a TikTok sound and let me know if you know where this sound actually came from.
Oh my gosh, bro.
Do you hear that, Sid? There's a man in the woods.
I've heard that before.
But you don't know where it came from? There's this short film on YouTube called Man in the Woods. It starts off with this group of kids in the playground of a school while a teacher is monitoring them, and they're like picking out some flowers from like a bush, and there's this like one kid named Sid who wants all the flowers to himself. He ends up telling the kids to watch out, that there's a man in the woods next to where they pick out their flowers. The kids start getting scared. They start telling their parents, Sid told us the man in the woods is a serial killer, and then their parents call up the school saying how, why aren't you doing anything to protect our kids? Ends up with him being fired from the school for child neglect, and it ends with what the kid started as a rumor ends up being true.
You know how difficult it is to get a job when a bitter mom slanders your rep with child neglect from the outset? Now who's in control of your classes? Single file lines? Single file lines? Little file swine, a killer by the pines? Really? Are you blind? Will you find your spine? See, a child decides to fill our minds with lies, and the next thing you see is people treating me like I'm committing crime. Those kids were lucky to have me. Do you see what you did? But I can play along. I can be good. Do you hear that, Sid? There's a man in the woods.
So the teacher or the principal ended up becoming the man in the woods because of a fucking lie that a little kid started and ruined his life. Became a fucking drug addict, alcoholic, something that could probably happen in real life. Somebody who's prone to madness, or somebody.
This is by far the most horrific thing that was ever live streamed. This absolutely horrific murder that I'm about to explain was live streamed on Instagram. This is extremely disturbing, so this is a massive trigger warning. On August 11th, 2023, Bosnia bodybuilder named Nermin Selmanovic murdered his wife live on Instagram Live, all while 12,000 people watched. Nermin had been abusing his wife during their entire marriage, and the pair had a young child. On the morning of August 11th, he told his followers that they could witness a live killing. As the live stream continues, he then turns the camera to his ex-wife, whose face was bloodied and disfigured from multiple injuries, probably from him repeatedly hitting her over and over again. He then starts talking to her, calling her derogatory names, and blames her for her own death because she reported him to the police. And what makes this even more disturbing is throughout the entire live stream, you can hear their child just screaming, crying. He then tells his followers that he's the child's father and his ex had hidden the toddler from him for over a week. He then picks up the gun, points it at his ex-wife's head, and then fires one shot into her forehead, killing her. It's absolutely horrifying, and I don't recommend looking for it. After doing this, he then tells his followers on Instagram to come and save the child. A police chase then began, and Nermin went on a shooting rampage. He continued to film and tells his viewers that he killed 2 other people, who actually turned out to be an innocent man and his young son. He ended up taking his own life on that same day. This is a case when after you get done researching it, you just don't feel right. This is very sad and very disturbing. Whatever you do, don't go looking for the live stream because it's honestly something you just don't want to see.
A spontaneous decision to buy a lottery ticket led to this man's murder. It was the 15th of November 2006. 40-year-old Abraham Shakespeare was driving around Florida when he stopped in Frostproof. He was driving alongside colleague Michael Ford, and the pair were taking the journey as part of work for a truck company. Michael popped into a shop and Abraham asked him to buy a lottery ticket for him. Abraham couldn't believe his luck when it was actually a winner. He was told he could have $30 million in small installments, or he could have a cash lump sum of $17 million. He decided to go for the $17 million because even though it was a lower number, he had never had this much money in his whole life. He struggled when growing up. He was born into poverty and he never learned to read or write. He never had a stable career and he'd spent some time in prison for small crimes. He worked casual jobs such as labouring and dishwashing. Overnight, he got more money than most people do in their lifetime. He bought a BMW and a huge $1 million house in Tampa. He took his girlfriend on holiday and obviously was loving his new wealth and freedom. However, the money started catching the attention of others. Friends and family suddenly started calling him up asking for favours and money. He was kind enough to give them the money and in some cases help people pay off their mortgages. He started to wish he could go back to his old life. That's when Doris Moore inserted herself into his business. She presented herself as a successful businesswoman who could help him write a book about his life. Abraham had no idea she was a serial fraudster. She ended up convincing him to go into business with her and she quickly stole $1 million of his money. She claimed he'd given her this money as a gift and she spent this on cars and holidays. By this point it was 2009 and Abraham started getting concerned where his money was going. He started questioning Doris about this and that's when he vanished. When questioned, Doris stated that Abraham was lying low for a while. Doris even wrote a fake letter and claimed that it was off him. Eventually though, his family did report him missing. Now the truth started to unfold when Doris asked for help from a man named Greg Smith. She wanted Greg to pretend to be Abraham on a phone call. She told Greg she needed to buy some time and she paid him $300 to pretend to be Abraham on the phone. By this point, police had already been tracing the pair. They saw this all unfold in a car park. That's when police tracked Greg down and got him on board as an informant. Now, Doris eventually admitted to Greg and unknowingly the police that she'd killed Abraham. She also told him where she'd buried him. Police followed the trail to Abraham's body and discovered that he'd been shot twice. Doris was sentenced to life in prison.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Was Benjamin Franklin a serial killer? And before you say no, of course not, that's crazy, why were 15 bodies pulled from his basement? And before we dive in, if you're darkly curious, you'll love the podcast. So 200 years after Benjamin Franklin lived in this home, renovations were happening to turn it into a museum. Except when they were doing renovations, they found this small windowless room underneath his garden. And in it contained 1,200 bones from 15 different people. And dating the bones showed that they were from the time that Benjamin Franklin was in the house. So evidence doesn't really point to Benjamin Franklin being a serial killer, but the reason that they're there is still really dark. It's believed that the bodies were robbed from local graves for medical students to practice on. The practice was illegal, but no bodies were being donated to science at the time. Benjamin Franklin most likely knew this was happening. I mean, he was letting them use his home for it, but he probably turned a blind eye to it because he knew he would get in trouble if he was allowing this to happen.
After the explosion at Haddonfield Sheriff's Department in 1989, serial killer Michael Myers and his niece Jamie were kidnapped and cared for by the Man in Black. 6 years later, Jamie gave birth to a baby boy on Halloween Eve 1995. The Man in Black then took the baby away to perform a cult ritual on him. Later that night, a nurse helped Jamie escape with her baby before being killed by Myers for her trouble. Jamie stole a truck after Myers snapped the neck of the driver. Back in Haddonfield, a now grown-up Tommy Doyle had obsessed over Myers since 1978 when he attacked his former babysitter Laurie Strode. Myers eventually caught up with Jamie and killed her in a barn. A rune symbol was seen at the crime scene, which matched the tattoo on Myers' wrist and the baby's chest. After 4 more murders at the hands of Myers, the Man in Black was revealed to be Dr. Wynne, the administrator of Smith's Grove Sanitarium, and leader of the Cult of Thorns. This was followed by 7 more deaths at the hands of Myers. Tommy used the baby to distract Myers, stabbed him in the neck with chemicals, beat him with a lead pipe and left for dead. After being shot multiple times and falling down a mine shaft on October 31st, 1988, American serial killer Michael Myers, having survived the fall and a dynamite blast, crawled out of a side tunnel. He found a small shack near the river in which a hermit lived and then fell into a coma. On October 30th, 1989, a year later, Myers, having been cared for by the hermit, finally woke up and stabbed him in the back. He then made his way back to Haddonfield. Jamie Lloyd was admitted to the Haddonfield Children's Clinic after stabbing her foster mother a year earlier and became a mute. Despite losing her voice, Jamie gained a telepathic link with her uncle Michael. A farm Halloween party soon turned into a crime scene when Myers went on one of his trademark killing sprees. Yet another cat and mouse chase ended with Myers being lured back to his childhood home. Dr. Loomis, having lost his mind, tried to use Jamie to lure Michael into a trap. He then beat Michael unconscious before suffering a stroke. Myers was then arrested. However, the police station was then blown up by a mystery figure, and Myers escaped.
Here are some facts that you probably didn't know that one day could save your life. Human bites are one of the most dangerous animal bites in the world due to infection rates and the amount of bacteria in our mouth. To stop a bite, brace yourself and push the part of you that's being bitten into their mouth with force so they can't rip into your skin. Palm trees are way heavier than they look, and their branches can randomly fall off without warning. If you're on a sinking ship and you're somehow able to get free, beware. If you're far down enough in the ocean, the water pressure will collapse your lungs. To avoid this, scream all the way to the top. It'll keep the pressure from killing you instantly. Okay, this may sound obvious, but do not eat uncooked slugs or snails. They have parasites that will make you paralyzed and eventually kill you. If you're trying to see if a mirror is two-sided, put your nail against the glass. If there's no gap between your nail and the reflection, run. If someone is stumbling around and sounds drunk but hasn't had any alcohol, ask them to smile. If one side of their face is drooping, get them to the hospital. They're having a stroke.
How did a kid studying abroad become a North Korean prisoner? In 2016, Otto Warmbier was studying abroad in China when he joined this black market tour group that was taking kids into North Korea. But the day he's leaving, he gets stopped by 2 guards and dragged back into the country. They thought that Otto had tried to steal a propaganda poster off of a wall, but there's not really any evidence that he did that. But they still held him prisoner inside of North Korea and put him on trial. In this video, you can see Otto giving a very coerced and rehearsed confession, and eventually he was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor inside the country. But then this is where it gets crazy. The next year, North Korea and the US strike a deal where Otto can be released and sent home. Except when his family goes to get him at the airport, he was completely comatose. North Korea said the coma was because he had gotten botulism from food and then took a sleeping pill. But then we found a document that said he had been in a coma since April of 2016, which was 1 month after his trial. His family believes that he had been tortured, but the coroner said that was probably not the case. The coma was most likely caused by lack of blood flow to the brain, not necessarily a sleeping pill. But we might never know the answer to this one. One time someone did dive headfirst into boiling water at Yellowstone after a dog. In 1981, David Kirwan was at Yellowstone with a friend when his friend's dog got away and jumped into a 200-degree hot spring. People around were screaming at David to not go in after the dog, but he didn't even give it a second thought, he just dove straight in. Some people completely dissolve when they do this because the pools tend to be very acidic, which I talk about in this week's episode, but that didn't happen here. So David was able to swim out far enough to get the dog, but he realized it was way too hot, so he had to leave the dog and turned around to come back. His friend was able to pull him out, but at this point David was completely blind from the boiling water getting into his eyes. A stranger had also run over to help and he tried to take David's shoe off of his foot, but David's skin had completely melted and started coming off with the shoe. And on top of all of this tragedy, Moosey, the dog, unfortunately didn't make it out of the hot spring. She was completely lost. And David also succumbed to the burns the next day. You'd assume at this point people know the dangers of the hot springs, but people go into them way more often than you'd think. If you have a dark curiosity about this kind of stuff, you might be interested in the episode I just did.
Here are some facts that you probably didn't know that one day could save your life. If your microwave is broken, do not try and fix it. Even if it's been unplugged for several days, it still holds a current capable of shocking you to death. If you're ever doing work on a car, always have it on jack stands or a lift. Car jacks are for lifting, not holding. If you're wounded but have a cigarette nearby, you can actually use the filling to pack the injury. This is because tobacco is aseptic, meaning there's little to no harmful bacteria. If you drink bad homemade alcohol, it may contain methanol, which is deadly. Ironically though, the cure is ethanol or regular alcohol, so if you get sick from moonshine, a glass of whiskey or some vodka could save your life. If you sit down to use the bathroom in prison, take 1 foot out of your pants completely. This way, if someone tries to attack you, you can get up and fight back. If some guy ever offers you polar bear liver, do not eat it. It contains a fatal amount of vitamin A. People who are looking for trouble are less likely to go for you if you say hi or simply let them know you're aware by introducing yourself.
This is the case of the baby who was found murdered near Gulliver's World theme park in Cheshire. On March the 14th, 1998, a hideous discovery was made. A dog walker was strolling through the woods near Gulliver's World in Warrington, Cheshire, when they found a baby's body in a bin bag. A post-mortem was conducted and showed the child had been strangled and beaten round the head. The victim was just hours old when he tragically died. The parents of the baby were never found and his identity remained a mystery. Now, 25 years later, we may finally have answers. The child was eventually named Callum by officers and he was given a funeral in which 150 locals attended. Kind locals raised over £800 to go towards the funeral costs and he was buried in a little white coffin. His headstone states, "With love from the people of Warrington." In July this year, 2 people from Liverpool were arrested on suspicion of his murder and have since been released on bail. Police state that the investigation is still ongoing. The detective who led the investigation once described the case as one of the most disturbing of his career.
Have you ever heard of the Pickering Lost Boys enigma? My name is Chad Smith, and I am one of the missing. Let me tell you what happened that night. We were 6 buddies, all high schoolers, and we were partying like never before. We were laughing, drinking, in short, enjoying life like any young people our age. Suddenly, one of us had a wild idea. What if we went to Pickering Marina? You know, that place where the rich leave their luxury boats. We went there, and started fooling around on the docks, teasing each other like all true buddies do. But then, everything changed. One of us, caught up in the euphoria, jumped onto a boat. And that's where it all went wrong. The next day, the police received a report. A boat and a paddle boat had disappeared. And we were nowhere to be found. No signs of a shipwreck, no trace of the boat or the paddle boat. We had simply vanished. The police tried everything, questioned all the town's residents, searched nearby water points for wrecks, but nothing. No information, as if we had simply disappeared off the face of the earth. But all that changed when the police found a camera miles away from the marina, in the middle of a forest. The police and the town's population were shocked when they discovered what was recorded on the camera. If you want to know what was on that camera, subscribe, like, and comment, Pickering, or Part 2. Don't miss the continuation of this incredible story.
The group killed their friend and then drove him around with a hat and sunglasses on, pretending he was still alive. Joshua Rose was just 21 years old, living in Pennsylvania. On the 25th of August 2016, he was at a friend's house in Scranton. He was with 19-year-old Preston Layfield and his ex-girlfriend, 20-year-old Amanda Wader. The trio were all using the substance H. Unfortunately, as is very common with this substance, Joshua lost consciousness. Preston and Amanda panicked as they figured he may have OD'd. Amanda called her friend, 22-year-old Tyler, and asked if he could give them a lift to the hospital. Tyler said yes, and the 3 of them put Joshua in the car and started the drive. However, rather than actually getting their friend the urgent help he needed, they ended up driving straight past the hospital. For some unknown reason, they continued to drive north down Interstate I-81. Between there and the remote wooded area that they ended up, at some point they put a bag over Joshua's head. Horrifically, Preston then strangled him with a cable. Amanda later stated that she knew Joshua was still alive at this point as she saw him breathing. Once Joshua was deceased, they put a hat and sunglasses on him to make him look like he was still alive. They stopped for petrol before carrying on and eventually dumping Joshua's body in a remote wooded area. Luckily, CCTV images captured them driving Joshua around with the hat and sunglasses on. All 3 pleaded guilty to 3rd-degree murder. Preston and Tyler both got 20 to 40 years. Amanda got 15 to 40 years.
This is the Claire Miller case, the TikToker who stabbed her sister to death. This is Claire Miller, and in 2021, she stabbed her sister to death. Claire was just an average 14-year-old girl who went to school, had friends, and did normal teenage things. And she also posted on TikTok a bunch, which accumulated a small fan base. And there are pages still active today reposting and sharing her TikToks. But she had a disturbing side of her that nobody knew about, and in 2021 that side of her would come out. Claire had an older sister named Helen who was 19 and Claire was 14. And what makes this case even sadder is that her sister Helen had cerebral palsy. But randomly on February 2nd, 2021, Claire just randomly snapped. She grabbed a knife in her house and stabbed her 19-year-old sister in the neck with it. Claire then called the police and turned herself in, but she was completely hysterical on the phone, claiming, "I killed my sister, you need to get here right now." And when the authorities arrived, Claire was standing outside completely covered in blood, and there was also blood all over the snow on the ground. Her sister was then found inside the house with the knife still in her neck. Authorities have gone on the record after this murder stating how this case is so unusual because it's a sister murdering her older sister, and Claire was only 14 years old when she committed this crime, which is just extremely young. Obviously, Claire's parents were devastated because not only did they lose one daughter, they lost their other daughter because Claire was arrested. Claire was sentenced to 12.5 years to 40 years in prison. This case is just horrible, and it just goes to show that you never know what somebody is really going through or thinking. I feel so bad for the parents and the sister, and may Helen rest in peace. This woman cut the baby out of her pregnant friend, and this case is absolutely sickening. This is the case of Lisa Montgomery. She constantly lied about being pregnant and having miscarriages. And in 2004, she became friends with a pregnant woman whose name was Bobby Stinnett. And on December 16th, 2004, Lisa Montgomery entered Stinnett's house and murdered her by strangulation. Lisa then cut Stinnett's unborn baby from her womb and fled the scene. Stinnett's body was discovered by her mother lying in a pool of blood, approximately an hour after the murder. She called the police immediately and described the wounds inflicted upon her daughter as appearing as if her stomach exploded. Just imagine that for a second. Paramedics were unsuccessful in attempts to revive Stinnett, and she was pronounced dead. Lisa Montgomery allegedly called her husband Kevin that same day around 5:15 p.m., saying that on a shopping trip she had gone into labor and given birth. The following day on December 17th, police went to Montgomery's home, and when they arrived, they found a car matching the description of the one at the crime scene, and when they entered the home, they found Lisa Montgomery inside holding the infant baby and watching television. Montgomery was then arrested an hour later after her story fell apart and she confessed. The kidnapped newborn baby that she cut out of her friend, whom she claimed was her own, was recovered and given back to the father. Lisa Montgomery was then put on death row and was recently executed by lethal injection on January 13th, 2021. This girl was so obsessed with having a baby of her own that she literally cut one out of her friend. And keep in mind, her friend was 8 months pregnant. She built a connection with this child and it was literally hers. Can you just imagine what Joe Stinnett was thinking in that moment? I can't even imagine the emotions that was running through her body. All in all, this case is absolutely sickening and Lisa Montgomery definitely deserved what she got.
When police arrived at this bloody murder scene, they were on the hunt for a masked intruder. What they ended up uncovering, no one expected. Couple Erin Everett and Tony Minnick lived in Jerome, Pennsylvania. The pair had begun a whirlwind romance after Erin had come out to members of her family as a lesbian. Tori had also recently broke off her engagement with a man. Unfortunately, initially Erin's family was not accepting of her sexuality. Despite this, though, the pair were happy together. The relationship was moving quite quickly, and Erin proposed to Tori early on. To the outside world, things looked picture perfect. Erin's parents, despite their initial reservations, ended up agreeing to let Tori move into their home to be with Erin. However, things started to take a dark turn. The pair had started to get into bad arguments after moving in together. Now, despite Erin telling everyone how happy she was, Erin's mother actually got concerned that Tori was being physically abusive to Erin. Their fights started getting worse and worse, and Tori started spending time away from their home. That was until Erin found out some devastating news. Tori had apparently been seeing her ex-fiancé Cody behind Erin's back. Erin was enraged by this, and on the evening of March the 25th, 2011, things would change forever. While Tori was fast asleep, Erin took her dad's gun and shot Tori twice. She then attacked her with a hammer. After realizing she was not able to dispose of Tori's body alone, she rang her mum. She claimed that a masked intruder had committed the murder and she just found Tori. Police were called and found the hideous scene. Erin seemed to be kind of trying to pin the attack on Tori's ex-fiancé Cody, but police saw right through her claims. After they grilled her in questioning, she eventually admitted to the crime. Despite her confession, she did plead not guilty and claimed she was abused by Tori. Eventually, she was found guilty and sentenced to life without parole.
This is one of the hardest execution videos to watch explained. The video that I'm about to explain is a short one, but it's absolutely gut-turning. The video setting is in some sort of rainforest area, and as the video begins, Deborah Bessa, who is the victim on your screen right now, can be seen kneeling on the ground, and a man is standing behind her holding her hair. His face is covered and he's holding a machete. The look on Deborah's face is complete fear and worry as she awaits her grisly demise. She is then pulled to the ground by the guy with the machete and lets out a haunting scream. Deborah is lying on her side, almost in a fetal position now, and the killer then takes the machete and tries to slash the side of her neck with it, but struggles as Deborah tries her best to defend herself, while letting out ear-piercing screams. A second man then enters the shot carrying what looks like a kitchen knife, and he then begins to stab Deborah in her side and around her ribcage area. She reacts with a short, sharp scream and then lies on her back after she is stabbed. The man with the machete then begins slashing at her throat as Deborah screams and screams and screams. And while this is happening, the man with the kitchen knife begins stabbing her in the stomach. And instinctively, she tries to move her hand to protect herself from the stabbings, but the killer stabs through her hand and into her stomach. After a few seconds, she stops screaming but is still moving as she is being stabbed and beheaded by the killers. The man with the machete then stands up and hits Deborah in the throat with the machete, which makes a cracking type sound, which means he most likely hit her spine with the blade. He then hits her again and again, and after the second strike, it appears Deborah vomits, but it comes out of her slashed throat instead of her mouth. He then hits her a couple more times and her body freezes up as her spinal cord is severed, and it appears the beheading has been completed and the video concludes. 2 of the 3 killers in this video have been arrested and this video was used as evidence. This video is absolutely horrific and some consider it one of the worst ones out there, and I can see why. Just the pure evil and brutality in this video is enough to make you look away. Never go searching for this video because you will regret it immediately.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there. This 18-year-old killed a mother and her daughter while street racing. So this is Cameron Herron. You probably know his story by now. In 2018, he was just a normal 18-year-old kid. At the time of the accident, Cameron was producing content for YouTube, was going to school, and on the day of the crash, he decided that he and his brother Tristan were going to race. So Cameron had a lifelong love of cars, and so he and his brother would always race, and he and his friends would race. But on that day, he reached a speed of 162 miles an hour in his car, and that's when he careened into Jessica and Lilia, a mother and daughter who were crossing the street. Jessica was actually wheeling her daughter across the street when Cameron struck them both with his vehicle. So tragically, on that day, David, Jessica's husband and Lilia's father, was driving home from work when he passed by a huge accident. He said to himself, wow, that must have been a bad accident. He went home, but when he got home, he noticed that his wife and daughter weren't there. So he got back in his vehicle, went out searching for them, and when he returned and passed by the scene of that accident, he noticed the stroller that was sitting on the side of the road. He recognized that that stroller belonged to his family. They owned one just like that. And shortly afterwards, he discovered that the victims of that horrific crash were his own wife and daughter, who were now dead. So Cameron was obviously arrested. He was eventually sentenced to 24 years in prison. And shockingly, afterwards, people have made thirst accounts dedicated to Cameron. The actual hashtag Cameron Herron on TikTok itself has billions of views. And people have been idolizing this guy. His own parents have said in news articles that they get calls at all times of the day to their home from people from countries all over the world, specifically a lot of people from the Middle East, calling to see how their son is doing. But yeah, this is just a tragic story all around. David lost his wife and daughter, his entire family, due to one idiot's reckless decision to go 162 miles an hour down a normal road. And in prison, Cameron Herron is going to be there for a very long time. So his entire adult life is pretty much gone, vanished before he could even be, the legal age to drink an alcoholic drink. This TikToker who had almost 1 million followers known as Jin Kid murdered his wife and another man. This story is extremely twisted. So this is just a typical tale of you can't trust everything you see online. So this is Ali Abulaban and his wife Anna. On TikTok, they were always posting about how great their marriage was, how great their relationship was. Ali was always posting these funny videos. And seriously, their lives seemed perfect. I mean, look at this TikTok. They're talking about how their relationship is completely drama-free. Now, Ali had almost 1 million followers at the time of his arrest, and people who followed him thought he was this funny, carefree, humorous guy who would just post kind of meaningless videos on the platform. But there were some red flags in their marriage. So for a while before the shootings happened, Ali and Anna were separated. And in at least one instance, the neighbors who lived across the hallway from these two actually reported that Anna came over to their apartment. She said that Ali had hit her and that she needed them to call the police for them because she didn't have a cell phone. He had taken it from her. And from July to October 2021, the month of the shooting, the police had been called to the couple's apartment 9 different times. So even though these two seemed like the perfect happy married couple on social media, they were far from that in real life. Now, eventually, Anna started living in the couple's apartment all alone. Ali was supposed to move out, but allegedly he made a secret key so that he could get in at any time. And Ali told police that at one point when Anna was at work, he broke into the apartment, he vandalized the apartment, and then he installed an app on his daughter's iPad which would allow him to monitor live audio coming from the apartment so he could hear everything that was going on in there. So on the same day that he broke into the apartment and installed this app on his daughter's iPad, a few hours later he was listening to the audio, kind of obsessing over it, and he heard a man and his wife giggling. And this allegedly was the last straw for Ali. So even though there was evidence that in the past Ali had actually cheated on Anna while the couple was married, he thought that she cheating on him was too far. And so he drove over to the apartment in San Diego, kicked open the door, and shot his wife Anna and her male friend Rayburn, killing them. Both of those two people would die from this shooting. So even though this happened back in 2021, the trial was supposed to start in 2022. The charges have officially been filed against him, but I haven't seen any updates on what's happening, and it's now been almost 2 years since the shooting. So hopefully we'll get some sort of clarity or resolution in this case, but it's just a sad story all around, and obviously this didn't have to happen. And it's just shocking to see how people can portray themselves to be happy-go-lucky people on social media when in reality, there can be a demon lurking behind the facade.
This is the disturbing case of the child who killed a child. In July 2018, 6-year-old Alicia McPhail was abducted from her bed. She'd been staying with her grandparents in the Isle of Bute. She'd gone to sleep watching Peppa Pig, and no one had any idea of the horrors that would unfold that evening. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Aaron Campbell was drinking with friends at his house. Aaron apparently became upset in the night because he had been arguing with his mum. He had had a challenging upbringing involving physical and emotional abuse. Aaron decided that evening he wanted to get some substances to smoke from a couple that he knew. The couple in question were Alicia's dad, Robert, and his girlfriend. They'd been known to sell substances to Aaron previously, but he could not get hold of them. Intending to go and steal them off them, Aaron armed himself with a knife. He headed to Robert's house where he lived with his parents and girlfriend. This was obviously where Alicia was staying that evening. When he arrived at the house, he noticed the 6-year-old sleeping in her bed and took the opportunity to snatch the poor defenseless young child. Disgustingly, he carried her to a secluded location, SA'd her, and then killed her. He then disposed of his clothes in the sea. At 6 a.m. the next day, Alicia's grandparents woke up to discover that the little girl was missing. They straight away alerted police and locals. When the family asked Aaron to keep an eye out for the little girl, he texted them back saying, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." A local man soon discovered Alicia's lifeless body around 15 minutes away from her house. Along with a lot of the local community, Aaron's mum actually checked her CCTV of her house. She was hoping that this would help with the investigation, and it definitely did. She saw her son leaving and returning from the house that night, and she handed the evidence over to police. Aaron was arrested, and it was discovered that the clothes that he'd abandoned on the beach did actually match with his DNA. This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into Screen 9, props open the door, and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 PM and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered Screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences.